I cannot articulately describe just how stupid these three are. I don't mean that I think Andy, Billy, and Nicole aren't smart and capable. I mean, each one of them is so chaotic and vital that when all three of them come together, extra energy is just kind of bound to strobe off of them into somewhere or something they're involved with. The Cunning Hares give the impression of being unreliable, incompetent, and haphazard. They appear as caricatures. Gags, the monotone girl who's way too into movies, the robot who's too obsessed with his favorite common writers, and the money-grubbing brat who never clears her debts. But impressions don't even cut through the surface of a character. They never do, and they never should. Never is way too strong of a word. The more information you can glance from someone, the better. The trick is cutting the bag enough to sample the sweets and or bitters inside without pouring the contents out of the gash. With impressions, we make a connection. With strong enough characters, we develop feelings as a baseline for those characters, and that baseline gets built on as the story moves along. What a writer makes of a character is entirely up to them, and what comes of those first impressions ultimately falls on the consumer, on us, on the people who are supposed to take a shine to the Cunning Hares. So let's talk about those impressions, and about those Cunning Hares, because from the second we lay eyes on them, it's not hard to see that merry band is a bunch of doofuses. And if all you want to see from them are those hijinks and quirks and gags that just keep on running, you're free to, but there's a difference between giving the impression of a caricature and actually being one. But it's a bit hard to divorce the actual cast from the rest of the zany shit in the universe. Zenless Zone Zero has some, animated characters. It's a video game, dude, they're all animated. Okay, but jokes aside, Moo has a point. Everyone from the vendors to the mooks is overly expressive and high energy. It builds a bombastic, kinetic social norm for the setting while also giving precedent for the enemies in this stylish action game to telegraph their attacks. Exaggeration flows through the game like water through a stream, and while exaggeration often equates to a lack of seriousness, it's a form of clarity. The easiest way for people to see something is to shove it in their faces. So in our first spat of time alone with Ambi has her doing a horizontal fall through a tight squeeze and sticking a high-speed landing just to start spouting off numbers and percentage chances of her own survival, recording her experiences almost right out the gate, we're given a sense of stoicism and pragmatism. This girl is agile, experienced, and logically minded. Even when she reunites with her teammate, she's cautious of every word Billy says until he clears suspicion of him being an imposter. Yeah, but her reason for doubting him was both completely unfounded and immediately dismissed for a less than convincing reason. What are you talking about? It's perfectly valid. But what matters is that it's good enough for her. Ambi gives off a logical impression, but the logic is a thin mask of a person that cares more about a person's credibility than the actual facts of the matter. It's not undeniable proof that clears Billy of being some shape-shifting ethereal, but it's knowing something incriminating about himself and fessing up to it that clears him as far as Ambi's concerned, because it's a deeper cut that presumably only they would know the answers to. Throughout their dealings with Nekomata, it's the cat's credibility that's in the front of Ambi's mind all throughout. She's the first to put suspicion on her, suspicion that is both warranted and right, mind you. And she displays that thing she values so highly by being the most outwardly capable of the Hares. Billy's pretty good too, but he monologues and he misfires, while Ambi's basically always on the ball. She cuts in to bail the others out no less than twice in the first chapter. The first thing we see from her is her being on the ball. Before the movie gimmicks, before the logic, we see a capable fighter who's done this shit before. That's the first impression, and as the most credible person in the group, her bringing someone else's credibility up has a bit more weight. And that balance between a logical front and the credibility-centric exterior makes for a great contrast with Billy after they finally get back together. You could maybe pull back and just call Ambi quirky, but there are surely people who are further in this game's story than I am who won't bat an eye to call Billy a moron, and I'm with them. He's not a moron. Yeah, I mean, he's just emotional. He's a moron, but I adore him. Billy's much more bombastic and has the robot who's the most human of all of his peers thing going on. Ambi and Nicole aren't inhumane. Yeah, they're just both freaks. Billy comes at us out of the gate with initiative and error. He's the one leading the way during the escape, he's the one who volunteers to and fails to break the glass, and he's the one who pops the flashbang that leads to the Hares being blown out into the hollow. He's the one who stops Ambi from recklessly blitzing the strongbox, and the one who makes the call to run from the Dualahan after they start running out of options. Billy is simultaneously the buffoon to Ambi's straight man and the straight man to Ambi's social nonsense. He's also the one who deciphers all of Ambi's movie-isms on the spot to translate for the audience and to show his understanding for the way her brain works. He gives the impression of a high-octane, over-talkative gunslinger, but his strongest suit is his ability to execute. He tries to spout out monologues and cool one-liners, but he never misses a shot. He's the one who spots out the kid in the hollow and is the one who dives in to grab her instead of taking shots at the ethereals given chase. His impression of a goofball is laid out on top of a capable and level-headed person. He has a mind for things that could be, but only really keeps that logical mind on the present. He asks why faith in big names with the government because of their awesome technology and drops it when they give him a reason. He doesn't really ever think ahead, meaning that logical mind has to pop out in the spur of the moment more often than not, and takes a back seat to the zaniness Billy usually brings out. The comedic relief is actually a cool badass is pretty tired as far as tropes go, but in Billy's case he's always both. Normally a drastic shift like that demands a shift in personality, but Billy's still our moron, and if you only see his comedic antics and shortcomings, you miss out on an entire layer of cake. And it's hardest to see that layer with Billy, or it's less obvious that it's something to be appreciated. Ambi's a dunce, but you can't even entertain the idea that she isn't capable. And we'll get to Nicole in a second, but I fully believe that you could go through this entire chapter just thinking Billy is nothing but comedic relief. And that's the product of making his impression one of gags and chaotic energy, and only showing that he's capable after we've gotten acquainted with the easygoing side that's almost always on display. Nicole balances it better, and in a different, but still traditional way. The whole intro is basically just Nicole acting cool, so our first real glimpse of who she is when she barges into Phaethon's office. In order, she mentions her teammates and then the strongbox, and needing the players' help to recover them all. Emphasis usually falls hardest on the first or last thing in a list, even more so when one of those items stands out against the rest. More of the rest of her encounter with Phaethon is about debts and credit offices and Nicole's constant misfortune and, affinity for money. And retroactively, it pins it in her head that her priority is that strongbox, and watching her admittedly really cutely light up at the sight of it enforces the idea that her priorities are a bit less than ideal, but she mentioned Billy and Ambi first. Honestly, she's pretty pragmatic and very detail-oriented. The commission's usually at the front of her mind. The second the details of the job with Nakamata change for the worse, becoming something that had put her and her crew in significantly more danger, she has to renegotiate, but she doesn't drop it because she's greedy. I think it's because she wants to help her, and payment validates her actions. They are an odd job agency, gotta pay the bills somehow. Which is why whenever she makes a moral decision to do something, one of the first things she does is make up an excuse about how it'll turn a profit. She calls all the people trapped in the blast zone golden nuggets, but she's rounding up a census, taking charge, getting accounts of the people that are there so they can make the most of the best case scenario and still do something if the worst comes to pass. She's attached to this scandal from moment one, because all that money grubbing is Nicole's front. Which is why she's happy to hand the scandal over to Belobog and public security, because it's not about the payment anymore, it's about screwing over the assholes who thought it'd be okay to toss lives away for the sake of their own profits. That's all the evidence anyone should need. Nicole's the one who calls the shots, she's the one who makes the plans, and the one who breaks up the fights and doles out the rewards, and she calls them with the interest of her crew, clients, and those involved in mind, with money being a bonus. And so the triangle continues to exist, despite being a slightly different orientation. Normally when a group like theirs is made, they're made with a theme in mind, and while I'm sure there are dozens of different readings you can do on Ambi, Billy, and Nicole, I landed on modes of persuasion, and specifically how the Cunning Hares put those modes on display while actually representing different modes. Ambi presents logos, monotone, quick to interject, task-oriented, and always backing up her claims and stints with references, but by nature of caring more about credibility than functionality, those references actually lend themselves more to ethos. Billy stands in as the pathos, the feeling, the appeal to emotion like whimsy and excitement, which he champions as he fights in the image of his favorite superheroes. But when things get serious, he steps in as the level-headed straight man and backs Ambi's logos up with his own, or backs her chaotic ethos up with the logic she shoves away. But Nicole comes off as being all about credibility. All ethos bag chaser that she is, she's incredibly professionally minded, flaunting their value as the Hares, manipulating Bell and Wise using their credibility as proxies, and counting on other established powers to help them solve their problems, like public security in the opener, and Belobog at the end of the chapter. But she's also a beggar and a brat, and weasels her way into and out of binds with wistful rationale. When the fun makes her crack, she's pathos up and down. In the encounter with the dead-end butcher, we get to see it all. Nicole starts by assessing the situation, keeping her mind on the task of defeating the monster, and being receptive to information regarding it. Ambi speaks up, not for any logical reason, but because movies have taught her that this sort of setting means that they're getting closer. Both Ambi and Nicole are in ethos mode, but on different wavelengths, and that causes some confusion. Billy interjects with something lighthearted, energetic, and stupid. Pathos, and then the butcher shows up. Ambi inserts herself to save Billy without a fuss. Logos. Nicole's priority shifts entirely to Billy's safety. Pathos, and Billy's first thoughts are about his own recklessness and oversight. Logos. Then the fight begins. And that's nice and all, but what does that mean exactly? Ambi's logical, Billy's emotional, and Nicole's, business-oriented. That's the impression they give and the face they wear for most of their part of the game. But Ambi's a citation-loving ditz, Billy's a level-headed everyman, and Nicole is just a sweet boss who wants to do the right thing at the end of the day. And turn a profit. But it's not just about turning a profit. I know. It's about who these characters are under the hood, and making that hood as shiny as possible. Impressions are the difference between wanting to see more of a character or less, and if these three dumbasses didn't show up in boxes, tagged up and down with exaggerations and pins, it'd wind up being harder to stick around and really take a shine to them. Characters are always more than the caricatures they're made out to be. Consider that sort of thing when you're writing. Okay, so hear me out. You know how there are two sides to persuasion, right? What if, let's take Billy for example. What if Billy receives information from Logos and gives with pathos, and that's the relationship? Bingo! That sounds backwards and complicated. Ambi receives information through Logos and presents it through ethos. Yeah, even then, that seems like a bit of a stretch. But Nicole is three pathoses in a trench coat pretending to be an ethos, right? Huh? No, I think he has a point. Not that we're going to use it, but write this stuff down. It's pretty good for a template.